how do you retain them? Because once you lose them, the ability to bring them back in is just so much more difficult.
Welcome to Retention Zone, the video podcast focused on subscriber retention in video streaming. I have with me today Nick Meacham from Sports Pro. Hi, Nick.
Sure thing. So I'm CEO at Sports Pro and have been running the company for at least 10 years, but with the company for about 13. So pretty well established in the Sports Pro business for quite a while now. But you run the business. We cover the international business of sports, particularly focused on the media side in particular, run events, podcasts, daily news output, features, insights, commercial guides, all around this space, and spent a lot of time talking about the sports media world through the podcast that I host, which is called Stream Time Sports, which we talk weekly to people in the industry about what's happening in this space. So yeah, pretty close to what's going on in the sports media world, that's for sure.
You mentioned your podcast. That's one of the reasons why I wanted you in this episode of Retention Zone. I was early running in the Langhe, which is the wine region in Torino, around Torino, and I was listening to Stream Time. And you were talking about NFL Gamepass international transition from the previous platform to being integrated in the zone. And also Chris Stone was with you, and he had one mention for me, not the most honorable, because he was saying he would tweet me when he saw some issues in the previous ones. So I said, but they're talking exactly about the matter that we want to talk about and treat in Retention Zone. That's why we created this video podcast. So tell me, summarizing everything that you have seen through these initial weeks, what is your take and what was the challenge? What is the challenge in this transition, which is clearly a subscription retention challenge in a different way, maybe in a specific way?
The NFL obviously did a deal. I think it's a 10-year deal with DAZN for all the rights, basically for NFL Gamepass, which is their international NFL Gamepass International, which is their international streaming product that's been in the market for quite a long time, and it's quite a significant deal for a number of reasons. Not only that they've given all their key streaming rights to one player, but indeed they're moving away from that having direct-to-consumer relationship they historically had, doing it all themselves, so to speak, with obviously with partners, through to handing over all the keys to a broadcaster or platform to basically enhance and scale the audience, because DAZN has an established broadcast audience, but effectively not just lifting the rights, lifting a whole product and trying to recreate the product in the DAZN platform itself. Now, for those obviously work in the tech space, most would know you can't just lift up a product from one space and just shift it into another. Streaming and digital does not work like that. So they've basically, from what I would guess, had to rebuild that entire product in the infrastructure of DAZN, which is such a significant piece of work. And so what has been the focus point that we've been trying to follow is, firstly, how does that product look and feel in the early stages of its launch, because it is basically a rebuild of an existing product. And how have they been able to migrate audiences from an established subscription product into a completely different platform? If you think the fact that NFL Game Pass is a product within the DAZN wider product, it's quite nuanced into how that all plays out. So that's the thing we've been very interested to see, how they're able to migrate those audiences and subscribers mainly from one platform to the other. So it's been interesting to follow that journey.
Totally agree. Moving the audience is quite a task. It's clear these people know direct to consumer on both ends. I think it also adds to the fact that you have a season, and the NFL season is not super long. So already in the past, transitioning from one season to the other and being able to retain subscriber was one of the key objectives, clearly, of any platform like that. Because I think the brand of the NFL has a lot of loyalty. And internationally, the avid fans are maybe less than, obviously, domestically in the US. But still, this moment where you have to decide if, pay again for the next season. It's already a crucial moment. And if you sum with that the fact that you're changing and integrating an existing platform, that's clearly a retention challenge. I know, because I've listened to your poster, that you and Chris tested, like anecdotally, this is not data science, this is anecdotes. What was your experience and why you were so curious about, the emails? Because clearly retention is a very sophisticated 360 experiment, maybe sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about, I run a small media company, not the scale of any of these that we're talking about, but just the nuance of trying to retain an audience, or firstly, to secure a subscriber is one project. And sometimes in many instances, that's actually the easy part. How do you retain them? Because once you lose them, the ability to bring them back in is just so much more difficult. Now, in this instance, what's really fascinating is that the fans have been generating a relationship directly with the NFL. They just see the NFL Gamepass as a standalone product they're subscribing to. In many instances, anecdotally, my own experience, by subscribing direct to the NFL Gamepass product, I know that's what I'm paying for. I'm willing to pay for it because I'm a fan. Very straightforward. When you start putting it as a subset of a product, the example I've used before is like what F1 do with Sky, which is not the same thing in the UK. But the F1 have their own OTT product, a premium product where you can watch the live racing, etc. But in the UK, Sky have those rights. And so what happens, the F1 TV product does not have the live races on it. And I was ready to subscribe to F1 TV after the Drive to Survive effect. I was all bought in. Like, this season, I'm going to really follow it this year. But then I'm told that I have to subscribe through a broadcast platform and partner to get access to that. And whilst the value to a subscriber may be higher, if you're not used to that, the whole notion, like psychologically, of going, okay, you need to subscribe to another product, or through another product, you may get more value, but I just want to pay for what I want, even if I'm going to pay a higher premium for it. Psychologically, that was tough for me to overcome in the initial phases and stages.
Let me stop you there. I think this is the most passionate speech I've heard about vertical sports OTT services, because that's not super popular in these ages, right?
Well, I was trying to think of another analogy there, Carlo, which was quite difficult. But I guess it's like, I was trying to think, maybe it's like wine. So if you know you like a bottle of wine, you're willing to pay for that bottle of wine, right? But if you go, there's companies that sell you 6 random bottles of wine. If you like variety, you'll pay for that. You might get it at a cheaper cost, but you don't know what you're going to get. So you're a bit unsure as to whether or not it's worth subscribing to that service. Whereas I know I like that brand. I want that. That's fine, even if you might get it in the mix. It's a more of a psychological thing about just how you look at products, and like there's much greater experts around marketing around that can sort of talk through that thing. But for me, it's just a factor to consider if you're not used to the behavior of signing to a broadcast subscription-based product that has multiple. It's about scale and breadth, right? The entire broadcast industry is almost going back into that space more and more these days. Then you have to just get the narrative, get the communication so nailed for people to understand, look, I'm getting the same product or better through this service. That's all you need to know. I have not seen firsthand, and you think I'd be a pretty good target, right, for broadcasters, particularly in markets like the UK, to say, hey, how are we going to target him? Because he's a certain level of earnings. He's into sports. He consumes lots of sports across different platforms. How do we target him to push into our platforms? I don't get marketed very, very well on these things. The only thing I've been marketed hard lately is DAZN. DAZN, since the NFL product's been launched, where I've been getting a notification for every single match that's gone live every round to try and push me to buy the product. So look, I just think there's a lot of nuance in marketing, right? I think marketing is often under discussed in this industry. They kind of say buy the rights, and then let's see if that will work out in the end game. But the art of being able to convert audiences into subscribers is often underappreciated or under discussed. You just look at people are looking lines in a spreadsheet and going, well, if we just convert X amount, then we're good, and this is worth the investment. And it's never that easy.
Yeah, for sure. I have my experience in the last 10 years is that direct-to-consumer marketing is one of the key aspects. And again, as I was thinking the other day, someone suggested that there should be a chief retention officer. But on the other end, I was thinking so much you heard about growth hackers. So it's easy, if you look online, jobs for growth hackers, which is the top of the funnel part. But especially in subscription business, you make money at the bottom of the funnel or post the funnel, right? So because again, you need to keep, if you want spending more, is staying more in a subscription business, right? And it's a combination. So I think in your case, the fact that how you were approached in the transition. So there is a lot of, I think, strategy and tactics to be in place. You clearly need solid data and dashboard and analytics to drive your decision and segmenting people. The more the transition is frictionless, the better it is. Clearly, the perceived value is what drives the people's decision, I guess. But I mean, tell me, maybe I'm a doctor again, because it's not data science, but what happened to you and Chris, basically?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, one of the experiences that we had is, so we were both subscribers to the Game Pass international product. So we wanted to see how that journey would play out. And so we looked to unsubscribe to the Game Pass product and had to give it several instances. But even before the DAZN transition or migration was implemented, we wanted to unsubscribe to the service, but it was incredibly difficult. The system and platform didn't work at the time. That was, I think, in the previous version of the model. And then when DAZN started to take on those rights, we found it really difficult to get onto the platform. We had to reach out to try different angles to reach out to DAZN itself or through the platform to try and unsubscribe, and it was quite difficult. In fact, Chris's example is that he actually cancelled it through the bank, but they used another merchant number to process the auto renewal that was in place, and he was charged even though he thought he was able to block that, and so he had to block it with the bank and got a refund through the bank itself. So basically, what's interesting about all this is effectively what the NFL and DAZN have done is, because they've decided to move this product, they've treated it in a very different type of deal where they've literally migrated the audience. They've taken the NFL Game Pass audience, and I don't know the legalities. I know a little bit about GDPR and little legitimate interest and first party consent and so forth, that they've taken that data and somehow integrated into the DAZN ecosystem. I got an email through legitimate interest, I guess, that was telling me that this migration was happening and that I'm going to be auto renewed, etc. But they've taken all that data and put it into the system, and so far as a user is concerned, you would be auto renewed unless you did something. But the ability to do something was actually quite difficult in that instance. So our experience, before I can talk about a few other markets that we followed and a few other examples in other countries, our experience was, yes, it was very difficult. That's not uncommon in the subscription world. It's quite everyone tries to make it a little bit more difficult as they can sometimes. People like New York Times are famous for that in the media world. Like, you have to literally call them up on the phone, otherwise there's no other way to cancel. And they're one of the most well-respected media businesses in the market. Yeah, so look, everyone's got their own ways of trying to make it a little bit more difficult to break down those, for you not to be able to break down those links and barriers to your subscription. But yeah, we found it difficult, but over time it started to become a little bit more systematic, a little bit easier for users to unsubscribe if they wanted to. But it was quite an interesting challenge to follow. That's for sure.
In an industry that was mostly B2B, sports and media, there is a lot of new models, and I think there will be some leaders that has to establish, both in terms of marketing strategy or the tools you have to use, because this is a bit new. So in the past, even from the sport properties, in the past you would sell rights to someone, not easy. I mean, super great respect for deal makers. Then you transition maybe after 4 years, whatever, now a bit more sometimes, to someone else, but you didn't have to take care of the audience, if not in a high level consideration. Now it means you really need to understand where the audience is. So I think that's why I think one of the reasons Retention Zone exists is that I think it's crucial we start talking about the subscription part or other form of monetization, because they're more in the hands of, so there's not like more the media layer that protects people with IP and rights. You need to start maybe slowly to understand that your transition is somehow into B2C. I think it's almost inevitable, but again, I may be wrong.
Yeah, no, completely. And I think that's where, I'm not saying that DAZN and the NFL have done it the wrong way. I think it's a fascinating case study for us to watch. because you're
Exactly.
talking about migrating audiences from one platform to another. And again, I don't know the legalities on how you can manage the data piece, but it looks like they've done some sort of licensing arrangement there, which has allowed them to perhaps overcome some of those barriers. But the ability to do it is so massive, because what I think what it looks like to me is there could have been greater education perhaps for NFL fans as to what DAZN are, because in a lot of markets, DAZN aren't a player, aren't a platform. Whereas in other markets, they have a huge array of rights. You think about Italy, you think about Germany, of course, right? Yeah. So that conversation to an NFL fan to say, "Hey, we're migrating you to that product," is one thing. But if you look at other markets where they don't really have a presence, the examples that we use was in Denmark, where there's forums galore that people are talking about who is this company charging us all of a sudden, because it's now coming from a DAZN account, not an NFL. They weren't even aware of that deal because the coverage doesn't really get transferred. Definitely to a different nation like Denmark won't be covering that at any sort of scale, and then it's only covered through probably trade media like ours, where it's not as interesting to the general consumer. They're just waiting for the next season to come up. So I think that education piece, not sure what approach they took, but it clearly missed a lot of those general fans who are also those avid fans who are willing to pay 150 euros a year for a service, which is pretty uncommon across the wider sports industry, where it's about scale and the lowest price matters. So there's a real avid fan base, but people are willing to pay a lot for. You've got to be careful on how you talk to them.
So somehow it's uncharted territory, a bit, not completely. And that's why I hope there are in the different areas, because it's a mix of people, data, tool system platforms that help you. Otherwise, you cannot do it manually. Otherwise, mistakes are. And there is a lot of complexity, because, you also go to payments, all the different payments. So, and the fact that you have app stores. So it's a very sophisticated, it was fascinating for me. I didn't know it in 2016, I didn't know it, and it was super fascinating. For example, one thing that is super niche, so it's a bit of educational for those that don't know, and there's a lot of people that know more than I do. The concept of merchant of record, which is basically the legal entity that is often the one that you see in the app stores, especially, that takes charge of all this kind of. That's kind of super complex if you do it on a global scale. And you need someone that knows all the tax, fiscal. So that's something that I didn't know it existed. And it's quite crucial, because if you do it wrong, it's a problem. And that's when I think that's why people in the bank see, and you mentioned merchant, you see a different name to what you expect very often. So, yeah.
You think about, you look at things across the wider sports media industry that we've seen that really leans into this e-commerce area. Like social media platforms for years have been moving and inching forward with the integration of e-commerce into it. But the difficulty has been what you've just described, the ability to charge people across the world who have different taxes, different models, etc., is actually really, really difficult, right? If the big tech companies can't do it, then or the big tech and social media players can't do it, then obviously there's something in that e-commerce aspect that makes it really difficult for others to consider it. So you definitely, for anyone who's looking to try and globalize a subscription product, you have to be working with the right people, because you're going to find it a lot more trickier than you ever would have thought possible once you get into the legals around finances. So I completely agree with you.
And also I was thinking, to make it, because one of the issues of the vertical, let's launch an OTT for sport, etc. You need also to have something that is prototyped that makes it economically sustainable. Because if you have to go through all this complexity, it becomes unsustainable like day one, because it's too complex to manage and pay the cost of reinventing the wheel. Because at the end, it's reinventing the wheel. But I think there's need a lot of best practices, education tools that have really to grow up, I guess.
Yeah, completely. And if you think about, if you're building a subscription product from day one, you're expected to understand and know the lifetime value of a subscriber to your business from day one. You got to think about conversion rates. You got to think about retention rates. Those things you can look across the industry and try and get a sense of it, but they're a little bit crystal ball stuff unless you really know and really cross what works and what doesn't. So you have to be really able to lean on the right sort of insights. Otherwise, you are just putting your finger in the air and trying to check which way the breeze is going. Hope you go with it. And the added complexity now is in the subscription game. You can't as businesses. We've seen what's happened in the valuation of media businesses now. You can't just take a loss for a few years and hope that you come out the other end with a nice profitable business, because actually what we've seen, it's a lot harder than that to build that. So you have to be much more pragmatic on how you're spending to bring audiences to your platform. And again, that retention bit is even so much more important as a result of that. You can't just look at a subscriber as a number. No, oh, we're happy to lose 10, 20% of our audience every year. That's fine. We'll just move and get more. That investment to get a new subscribers is not worth it. It's not worth the effort in comparison to just keeping that audience in place if you can, and really valuing that relationship, because you can take it for granted sometimes if you're not careful.
No, and I think what you mentioned, the fact that the subscriber is not a number. I have to say, one of the things that fascinated me is that you have a paying subscriber in front of you. In the web and app free era, you would have these audiences. In this case, each one is a paying customer, and everything you do on your side in terms of rational product decision, etc., is so much valuable. I don't know. I felt really more, I don't want to say inspired and accountable, and I loved it, because you can cut a lot of bullshit because, yeah, guys, but look, doesn't work. So I have to say, you mentioned something that remind me. I saw either this morning or yesterday Arti Dabas on your next, I guess, podcast episodes, and she was basically saying why you should not launch an OTT service when it's too early or when it doesn't make the case. I don't want to spoil, so maybe just a shameless promotion for your podcast.
Yeah, I mean, so Artie's great. She's been with the ICC for over a decade, and now with Formula E. So we spent a lot of time talking about how complex the media rights landscape is, and one of the things we're all pretty in consensus on is that it's so difficult for a challenger sports property, a lower tier sports property than say your NFLs and Premier Leagues, to just build a platform and expect lots of audiences to magically come and spend lots of money to subscribe to that. You've got a whole journey you have to create. You've got to create fandom from scratch, and you can't do that just purely behind a paywall. So how do you build up the inertia, the excitement, the fandom, and also how do you monetize all that effectively? Formula E is a great example of what most, say, disruptor sports, they call them, the tier 2 sports properties, that they have to go partnerships first. They have to look at how do you get reach, how do you create a point of difference to bring subscribers and partners on board. And so that's their priority, is a monetization piece. It doesn't mean that OTT and a subscription product isn't off the table, but it's that whole thing about expectation, right? What do you expect that to deliver for you? If you expect that you build an OTT product that's subscription based and you're a disruptor sport, the year later you're going to be, well, that's our number one revenue stream as a broadcast product, you're crazy. But can it be a valuable part of the mix for those avid fan bases? 100%. And you can create a bit of a user journey towards those. And the things we just talked about is how if you were to look at an OTT product, just how do you make it fit within the mix, rather than it's not that or bust, which I think sometimes, it was the sort of the thinking 5 years ago, was like the hope was, fans will just line up and queue up to buy a subscription for us. Well, actually, sports is an entertainment product. You've got a segment of audience that might, but it's been relying on being an entertainment product for a long time. So you are reaching audiences that are generalists, generally interested in sports as an entertainment product. That's who the bulk of your audience is, and to lean into that rather than try and push people into something that they're not really interested in. And so we talked a lot about particularly the Formula E approach, and indeed even single sports subscription products as well. And I think there's some pretty good consistencies. I think the industry's obviously been going through a bit of a flux and trying to get our heads around all that. But now we're into this sort of mode of, and the DAZN NFL one's a great example of this aggregation now and opportunities for that. If the DAZN model, NFL model works, then expect the queue for DAZN will get knocking on their door from other sports properties who have built audiences to go, hey, I've got an extra bit of audience here. Like, because you start selling audience as well as product and rights, it's a whole different ball game than just buying some live rights off of someone. And one other thing I was thinking actually about the NFL example, which I think's, for me, it's a really big challenge and an opportunity. One of the reasons I subscribe to something like for a US sports-based product is because of the time zone changes, the products they created around highlights and the non-live aspects. But what's interesting, I looked on YouTube yesterday, and there's 3 or 4 different cuts of the highlights now readily available on the YouTube channel. And again, like if you subscribe to YouTube as a channel, you get it for a fraction of the price, and you can download it to your any device if you need to download it, and they just have all the accessibility there. So for those audiences in those sectors, also the time zones, I should say, where the live component isn't quite as important, which I think a lot of us would agree that live is not as important as it used to be because of the proliferation of social and highlights.
Yeah.
Then why again would I be subscribing to one of the most expensive subscription products if I'm not going to watch that much live? So that's another challenge they've got to deal with, I think, is the YouTube's role. And then how do you create product that is more valuable to drive subscriptions than just the live product itself, particularly if you're targeting US sports?
And especially, I mean, this is very specific to the NFL. The 40 minutes condensed game and the 60 minutes Sunday condensed game that introduced in the past. I mean, that's very specific. But again, this makes a lot of sense as a download. Especially, I mean, it's a London story. I mean, a commute in the underground. I think everybody tells the story. But it's a true need. Yeah, it's a true need.
It's a true need. There is a market there. If you think about all the big metro markets across Europe, think Paris. You think Paris. You think various markets in Germany, where Germany is now arguably the #1 market for the NFL in Europe now.
Yeah.
That you add those audience groups together of all those metros, and then all of a sudden you've got, there's a 30, 40, 50 million total audience that we're talking to here that might value those sorts of products. But yeah, I do try and avoid getting into too much into, well, I travel on the tube, so I would want that. But what else? What would the market want? But I think there is a case for it, European wise, anyway.
Yeah, totally. So thank you, Nick. Last thing, we will meet in Madrid in, I don't know what, 2 months.
And so not even, 2 months. 2 months exactly, actually. Yeah.
So and you change even the name of that event, right? A bit.
Yeah, we changed the name a little bit because one thing that I've been aware of probably for a while now is that the term of OTT is really just a subset of the broadcast industry. And even looking at the stuff that we were doing, as well as the people that were coming to our events, they are more than just OTT specialists. They are indeed people who work in social media, who work in general broadcast, who work across the entire sports media ecosystem. And so the goal is just to realign that with what it was almost what it was already, and still focus on those same key points, both technology and strategy on the sports media side, but just do more of it and make it more fit for purpose for people who perhaps aren't aware of, they don't see OTT and think, oh, it's only about a specific section of the industry, which is really, it's not even a commonly used term these days as it is when it's interchangeably used with streaming and so forth. So we're excited. The audience is going to be record attendances. We've had more rights holders than ever signing up early stages, which sort of leans into the fact that there's more questions than answers still for most of the sports industry to get solved. So they're trying to come to these sorts of things and work out how to tackle it. So a good time to be getting all together and sharing our challenges and hopefully some solutions along the way.
Va bene. See you in Madrid then. Thank you, Nick.
Cheers. See you, Carlo.